Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I'm one full week away from the start of my ski season. I'm heading over to meet up with the crew from Outside Life, and I don't know any of them yet. But I do know this group does a ton of rad trips that you can find out about over at OutsideLife.com. And while I'm not going on one of their badass trips to Japan or the other exotic locations where they take care of everything and bring the party, I'm really excited for this Jackson Hole trip. Sure, I'll have to be on the mic a little bit, but I love that. Plus, I love skiing and partying. So that's going to be a blast. I'm going to try to make a podcast out of the whole trip, and that should be an adventure in itself. And if you're in Jackson, come find me the night of the West End DJ set. I'll be the dude on the mic beforehand, I think. Actually, I don't even know. I don't know all the details about this trip yet. And while I love having a run a show and knowing exactly what I'm doing, I really don't need that. Just put a mic in my hand and say go, and I can create the energy for an event pretty much every time. So I don't need that run of show. I love to have it, but regardless, who cares? I'm stoked to be going to Jackson Hole. I'm looking up to just showing up and having Outside Life blow my mind. Because if you listen to the show in the past 3 years, you know that I need my mind blown in a good way. And maybe partying with college kids will help that. Speaking of blown, I hope some snow blows into Jackson, as it's not looking that great a week out from the trip. And I'm sure the Shark's Teeth early season in Jackson can be very scary. What's even scarier on my end is that I'm leaving my 16-year-old at home alone for 4 days. And that's the new reality for me, the new normal. I'm working without a net, and when a work trip happens, well, I have to trust my boy. And we all know what 16-year-olds are capable of. And based on my personal history, that is very scary for me. I'll have some safeguards in place, and hopefully my kid goes to school, he doesn't go to jail, and my dog doesn't die. But that's me starting to spiral about my personal life. What I should be doing is talking about my professional life, and that life is all about talking on microphones and selling stickers and tents. And this week, I'm going to spare the sticker talk and jump right into introducing my guest for this week's business episode. George Couperthwait is another legendary behind-the-scenes player in the ski biz. While these days he's known for running Stockli in the US, George will be remembered for some of his innovations at Rossignol, but George has done so much to make skiing better, and it's all based on his passion and the relationships he's built throughout the industry. Before we get into the podcast, I want to thank you for listening. While a few of you mentioned that my episode last week with Chris Davenport was a little bit better because I didn't use AI editing, well, I used AI editing again this week with George. To tell you the truth, only a couple people emailed in and said, hey, it was better without AI editing, but it wasn't that much better. So if it saves you that much time, then I would just go the AI route. Well, it does save me that much time. So I am going to go the AI route on most of these episodes. There may be some where I have a lot of laughing and stuff that gets deleted by AI, where I go back and I actually just do a regular edit and it'll take me a lot longer. But I'll only do that if I need to do that. If it really does annoy you though, and the AI, the words where they get a little wonky here and there, it happens a couple times in the podcast, just let me know. Email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com, and maybe I'll go back and just re-edit it the normal way. I don't want to annoy you at all, because the most important thing about listening to a podcast is not being annoyed by the sound, so I want to eliminate that. That's about enough of me just rambling about sound. What I want to do now is thank you for listening each week. I want to ask you to tell a friend about the show, because I'm not some athlete with a built-in audience who can just start a podcast and have thousands of listeners. It has taken me 10 years to build up to these 10,000 people that listen, and I'm stoked that each and every one of you come and listen each week. And if you tell one person and they listen next week, then we could have 20,000 people listening to the podcast. So that would be really incredible for me. But regardless, thank you for listening. Thank you for telling a friend. And the most important thing that you can really do for me is to support my sponsors who make this show happen. They are Elan Skis, Stanley, Best Day Brewing, Outdoor Research, Thermic Heated Socks, and Ski Idaho. Now, it's time to chat with George Couperthwait. You have been responsible for some amazing products in the ski industry over the years, but I'm going to start off with the products that really didn't go too far. And we're going to start with one, I think it was called the Mutilex. And could you describe that one for us?
I don't know much about it. That happened after I left Rossignol. I think it was a ski that had some kind of shock absorber on the tip and maybe on the tail, and you could adjust the stiffness and the way the ski skied. But that was definitely after my time at Rossignol.
Okay, I thought you were involved, or it was one of your friends, some crazy Frenchman who
No,
invented it or something.
no, it was, I think Jerome Noviant had a lot to do with it. And Jerome, to be honest with you, was one of the greatest keys to the success from a product development standpoint that I had. He was really, really good at testing and working with the factory to develop the finished product that you'd see in the stores. And that amount of work was a huge amount of work. Back then, I was going to Europe probably 10, 12 times a year. And a lot of that stuff was happening in the summer. And we'd drive from Grenoble up to Teen, Val d'Isère. We'd get up there at like 7 o'clock in the morning. We'd lug the stuff up in a train. We'd go out and ski on it, and you either had it or you didn't, and you knew it right away and came back down and worked on it. That was a huge amount of the success that Rossignol has, and where the performance came from was that testing. I don't know much about that other ski.
All right, so we're going to jump into something else that maybe didn't get so much testing at Rossignol. And when they jumped into the boot market, they bought Caber. And did Caber just have molds lying around that they made old boots with that you guys were like, hey, we'll just make the first run of Rossi boots with these Caber molds? Because I heard there was something called the Condor's Nest that, like, while Rossi was known for having a narrow, low-profile boot, that boot you could put 2 feet in.
Right. So the purchase of Caber happened before my time.
You're falling all out of my little timeline here, but tell me the story.
So I started with Rossignol in 1990. But I would say there was 2 things that happened back then. There was the purchase of Caber, and then there was the move from Caber to the Lang factory, because Mr. Boisvive, the owner of Rossignol, also owned Lang, Dynastar, and eventually Look. And so all the Caber was moved into production in the Lang factory. And when I started, the first boot that came out, which was before my time, was the 900. To put it nicely, that was a very high volume boot. And I think that's probably what you're referring to as the Condor's Nest.
Yes.
But when I started working there, my first job in-house was product manager. And so right when I started was when we started the development of the Course series, which was a new Rossignol boot, which was really designed to be a performance boot. And it actually was a really, really good skiing boot. It wasn't perfect, but in concept, it was a really, really good skiing boot. That boot was kind of what put Rossignol on the map in regards to ski boots. It was very high performance. It was very stiff. We had 3 different flexes back then. They use different numbers now, but we used the stiffness of the plastic, and that was about as stiff a boot as we could make in the beginning. So it was really performance oriented, and it lended itself well to matching up with the skis.
Yeah, it was a totally different kind of ski back then. And then when you think about the last one, I'm going to bring up product innovation that you probably weren't part of with this one either, based on my research, which hasn't been so great, is the orbital pole. And I know you weren't the concept guy behind the orbital pole, but what was that, and what need was that pole trying to solve?
I don't even know anything about that one.
You don't even know what I'm talking about?
No.
I was told that you worked on.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, no, that was actually a cool product. So when I left Rossignol, I moved to Atlanta for 3 years, and I came back up to Vermont because my wife's from here, and living in Atlanta was a really different lifestyle for me. I would wake up in the fall every year and put on a sweater and think it was going to be cold out, and it never got cold. So I was eager to move back up here, and we had a young daughter at the time and another one on the way. So I started a consulting business and worked in consulting for multiple different companies, and one of them was Orbital Pole. And it was a cool concept. It was basically the basket had 2 settings. Number one, you could click it up, and it was really small, almost like a racing basket that you could use on the East Coast. And then you would just push a button on it, and it would open up and be a powder basket. And so in theory, it was really cool.
Was it like a stiletto where you pushed a button and it just went like ching?
Yeah, it would pop open. If I remember correctly, the mechanism was in the basket, and there was just an easy way to click on it, and it would open right up. So you didn't need to have different sets of poles. You weren't flinging around this big basket when you were skiing on groomers. And at the same time, on a powder day, it would pop open, and it was like had, I think, 3 or 4 pedals, and it would open up, and it would be a great powder basket as well. So that was a cool product. It just, when I got involved in it, typically with all these companies that I worked with from a consulting standpoint back then, they were early products and they needed more product development, which I had, obviously a decent amount of experience in. And I think the developer of that was trying to go totally e-commerce back then, which was in the early 2000s. And e-commerce really wasn't a strong mechanism for ski equipment back then anyway. So,
well, ahead of its time with the orbital pole and me just totally off on all of these wonky products, but that doesn't really matter because there's a lot of products that you killed it with, and we're going to talk about those later. But you grew up in Binghamton, New York, and your family owned, I think, Fowler's department store, and it's you, your brother. Are there others?
I have three brothers, all younger. My youngest brother, Andrew, works in the ski business.
Yes.
For Ed. You probably met him before. My brother Ken lives in Kittery, Maine. He's a builder. And my brother Bill lives right outside of Cooperstown, New York, and works for an insurance company.
And it sounds like the sports when you were growing up, it was like skiing, motocross, and water skiing. Was that all stuff you did growing up?
Yeah, I mean, skiing for sure was a big thing growing up. We were about an hour from Greek Peak. I broke my leg at Greek Peak when I was 5 years old. The kind of funny story about that is Greek Peak had one of the very first amputee ski programs in the country. And there were 2 or 3 people there, young people, who were amputee skiers. This was probably like late 60s, early 70s, who were ripping skiers, amputee skiers without riggers. And when I broke my leg, I just assumed that that's what a skiing broken leg was. And so I figured, when I was in the hospital and getting a cast, that's what skiing was going to be like for me. Thankfully, it didn't turn out that way. But I told my dad, when I broke my leg, I said, I'm never skiing again. But that didn't really work out. So,
did you guys ski a lot when you were kids? Were you weekend warriors going all the time?
Mostly weekend. And then, when I got my license, I would go up a lot. And then I actually ended up in prep school in Lake Placid at Northwood School and ski raced. That's where I started ski racing.
Okay, so high school was all about ski racing for you when you moved over to that school? Like that was the focus?
Oh, yeah.
To be good?
Yeah, skiing at Whiteface definitely made you a good skier.
I would think when you're in high school then, too, it's probably 1980-ish and the Olympics are like right in your backyard. How crazy was that?
Yeah, actually, I went to prep school the year after the Olympics, but there was still, a significant buzz. And we raced downhill. I wasn't very good, but we raced downhill on the women's downhill at Whiteface at Lake Placid. I was in a couple of races there. And back then, you didn't have like B-net and stuff like that. You had hay bales in front of a couple of trees. And if you went in the woods, you were done for. But it was a really cool experience.
Was it ski racing in high school and college as well?
So I ski raced in prep school. When I got to college, I coached ski racing. I coached at Loon Mountain. And then after I got out of college, I went back to Lake Placid and started coaching ski racing there for both the Mountain House and Northwood School at NICEF.
So you graduate college in 95 or 85, and then you just go right into being a ski bum and teaching skiing, and that's kind of what you do and kind of fit your way into the industry that way?
Yeah, definitely. And after I coached for 3 years, I think, there was a local guy in Lake Placid who was a salesman for Nordica, and I worked for him for 3 years as his assistant on the road, sales associate, traveling and doing sales for Nordica boots, Smith goggles, and a couple other brands.
And it was Bob McDermott who was your head rep for that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And was he like one of those legendary dudes in the Northeast where he's like the Yoda of reps up there?
He still is a legend, and people talk about him today. And he worked in the industry for a really long time. He kind of kept his age a secret, but I think he was out there longer than probably most people.
So when you work for a guy like that and you see the passion in a dude who's a little bit older but still going to do all the stuff, is that kind of where you learn everything is from a dude like that?
Yeah, I think I learned a lot about relationship building with him. That was the key. I didn't understand, the value of, when you're on the road doing those kind of things, your value is walking into a store and being able to connect with the owners and shop employees right away. And that was really probably the most important thing I learned from him. But at the same time, working for Nordica, I learned a lot about boot fitting. I was doing some boot fitting for some U.S. ski team people. There was a company in Lake Placid called Petersen Orthotics. So I was learning how to make orthotics, how to grind boots, how to camp boots, different things like that. So that's where I got kind of some technical background too.
And this is a time when the industry was kind of different than today. Like every territory had its head rep, and then every territory had a tech as well. And you were the grunt doing all the clinics and you were doing all the demos, and the head rep would show up to the big stuff when he needed to be the face guy there. But the rep would really sell stuff in. He would deploy all the plans for the winter and set your schedule. And then were you pretty much in a van all winter long, just like ski resort to ski resort and making 15 grand a year?
Yeah, I mean, so the reps, to be fair, were on the road a lot. My first territory started in Pittsburgh, covered all of upstate New York and down to Westchester. And there would be events that we would go to, like Columbus Day weekend, I remember was always a classic. We'd have to go to Jamestown, New York, which is about, I think, an hour and a half south of Buffalo. And within a day, we would have to be in White Plains, New York, in Westchester County, selling ski boots again there. So the head reps were on the road as much as the sales associates. You needed to cover that much ground. And there was more ski shops back then too. So it was a lot of on the road. And basically, I would hook up with the tech rep from Rossignol and we'd follow each other around to all these events and do the same thing. And we were on the road a lot. And so if you were doing demos and stuff, you'd get into town on a Friday, you'd go work in the ski shop, help them sell skis, help them sell boots. You were just there really to try and help them out. And then Saturday morning, you'd get up and you'd go to a ski area and do a demo day. And a lot of times, because of the finances and stuff, we were carrying sleeping bags with us all the time. And we were hooking up with the shop kids, going out and having the beers and asking if we could sleep on their couch afterwards. So,
the ski industry it's interesting. I don't know of any other industries that do this, but I've never really worked in other industries. But do you find it weird that in the ski industry, if there's a Columbus Day sale, that every company is going to send like 3 people from their company to show up and just like start selling skis for the store and taking over the sales floor job?
It's really an important part of the business, is the understanding that not only do our primary business is to sell to the ski shops, to market, promote, and work with them to try and get them to buy in, but you're also really responsible for marketing at the consumer level, whether it be going to consumer trade shows, going to do demos. Demos are still, especially for like what we're doing now with Stockli, really, really critical part of the business. A lot of manufacturers have given up on that part, but we find it really important.
Well, I think you're also selling a premium product and people want to know that it skis like you say it's going to ski. And once it does, it's all validated and then they can go buy it and not feel bad about it.
Yeah, exactly. It's really critical.
But today in this ski world, it's like, is there a role for that dirtbag skier like you who was like just going shop to shop, making no money whatsoever, but doing it for the love and the hope of moving up? Is there that role anymore?
It's passion, It's really, you have to find people that have passion and that love the sport, and that's where it all starts. You can teach people the rest once you get them involved. I would say it's a little more difficult to find young people that want to do that kind of travel. But when you do, if they're passionate about it, you can mentor them and have really strong success.
So you do that job and you eventually bump up and get a job with Rossi. I don't know if it's a bump up or what, but what was your first job with Rossignol and how did you get it?
It was the same job as a tech rep in upstate New York. I did that for 2 years and I got it because at that time, my job with Nordica was kind of split between working for Bob McDermott and he was paying me in part and Nordica was paying me in part. When I went to Rossignol as a sales associate, that was more of a paid by Rossignol thing. So I actually got a company van. I think I had insurance, things like that, the computer. So that was a little bit more serious from that focus. And I did that for 2 years. While I was working for Nordica, I got to know Randy Williamson, and Will Mason was a tech rep at that time. And he actually moved to Vermont to become a sales rep, and I took over his position. And we were all really good friends because we were on the road a lot. And so it was a good opportunity for me.
And when you were in-house at that point, like 1988 to 92, I mean, I know you get in 90, but from 88 to 92, it's La Bamba, Alberto Tomba time. They've got the 4S Kevlar. I mean, I think they sold like 100,000 units of that ski. Is that fair to say?
Those are what they call the good old days. It was huge, huge numbers. And when I left Rossignol, and most of the time I was there, we enjoyed probably between 20 and 24% market share in skis in the U.S. market. We were the number one brand. And back then it was us and K2 that were going head to head, and they probably enjoyed about 20% market share. So between the two brands, we were almost half of the market.
And when you think about that ski, though, being that it was like the high end, the Rolls Royce of what you guys make, or the Ferrari of what you guys make, and it's the number one selling ski in the world, or maybe of all time, has there ever been a ski after that you've seen do units like that?
That ski was really special. And part of it, I think, having been in ski development, was luck. I remember 10 years later, we had a pair in the office, and I went to ski on it just to feel what you used to feel and feel what it was like. And it was the sweet, sweet ski, just really well balanced and really comfortable. And you could put like a low end intermediate on it up to an expert level skier, and they loved it. That envelope is really the key to kind of that model's success, was everybody wanted a pair and everybody could ski on it. And yeah, it was hot beyond compare for sure.
And so were budgets just absolutely crazy then, like no other time that you've been at Rossignol when they're selling that many units?
Yeah. So we went from the 4SK to the 4G to the 7SK to the 7G. There were slalom and GS skis in there. But the market at that point was really 100% driven by racing. And so it was a really strong connection with, like you said, like Alberto Tomba and the things that were going on with racing, Tamara McKinney in the U.S., those days, those racers and what they were skiing on, it was really important to the brand. And it's what drove the brand at Rossignol for a really, really long time. And those numbers helped fuel, a junior race program that was the best in the world, I think, in the U.S., bar none. But there was a significant amount of skis that were loaned out to junior race programs to ensure that we had the next up-and-coming skiers.
It's time for my first round of sponsors, and Ski Idaho is back this season, and if you haven't skied in Idaho, then you're missing the best-kept ski secret in the nation. Think 19 uncrowded ski areas with epic terrain that all get a ton of snow. In Idaho, you'll ski a lot more than you're waiting in line, and they really have something for everyone. When you visit Idaho, resorts like Sun Valley, Grand Targhee, Schweitzer, Silver, and Tamarack offer that on-mountain lodging experience, and there are so many other mountains to choose from throughout the state. Between the snow, the terrain, the award-winning restaurants, and experiences like horse-drawn sleigh rides, indoor water parks, spas, skating, guided snowshoeing, and so much more, I'm not kidding when I say there really is something for everyone this winter in Idaho. And if you haven't heard about the 5th and 6th grade passport program that allows kids to ride multiple times at each resort for only $29, you need to check it out. It's worth visiting Idaho just for that. To find out more about the passport program and all things skiing in Idaho, head on over to skiidaho.us. Next up, it's outdoor research. And if you haven't checked out outdoorresearch.com in the past week or so, then you haven't seen the brand new winter line, which looks incredible. I could spend a lot of this ad telling you all the tech and why outdoor research is better, but know that in the 1980s and the early 90s, outdoor research built a reputation on functional quality outdoor gear that pushed the limits of innovative possibilities. And those who were function first were all about OR gear, because it was and it still is built better, and outdoor research is still pushing those limits of innovation. This year, the outerwear focuses on 3 new collections: the Cloud Chaser for backcountry and the Powderverse and Hemisphere collections for freeride, as well as some staples in the line like the Snow Crew collection. These outerwear systems are styled for and by athletes like Mark Adma, Troy Podmilsack, Zoe Aitken, snowboarder Neil Provo, and others, and that's why this outerwear collection not only looks so good, but each piece is more functional than ever, and they're all you're going to need in any conditions. To find out more about the new collection, head on over to outdoorresearch.com. My final sponsor this round is Best Day Brewing, and now is the time to think snow. And skiers, snowboarders, weekend warriors, tubers, sledders, snowbikers, snowmobilers, snowshoers, sled doggers, shovel racers, snow angel makers, ice skaters, snowball fighters, igloo builders, you get it. The doers of winter are starting to get ready to shred, and post-shred, it's all about après. And this year, do après the right way. Forget about the calories, forget about the alcohol, forget about not taking more runs on the mountain, forget about getting in trouble on the way home, because with a beer from Best Day Brewing, you don't have to worry about any negative consequences, just incredible flavor. Blind taste tests prove that you won't be able to taste the difference between a Best Day and your favorite beer with alcohol. The only difference you'll notice is how good you'll feel in the morning, and you're going to remember what you did last night, which is almost refreshing as a best day itself. To celebrate your best day yet, next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of Best Day. Or you can always buy it on your Alaska Airlines flight, Amazon.com, or head on over to bestdaybrewing.com to get the full assortment of Best Days. Those are my sponsors. Now it's time to jump back into the podcast.
When I say Tomba, he's like the biggest rock star, I feel like, of almost all time.
Yeah.
Especially back in that day. Did you get to work with him, and did you get to do stuff with him as an employee?
I did a little bit. We did a program with Toyota after Tomba retired that was called the Toyota Rossignol Tomba Tour. And he would go to different places, and they would set up like a pro series where you got to race against him and things like that. And I remember I was part of one at Beaver Creek, and we actually got Beaver Creek to build some jumps. And that was like right at the beginning of the whole freestyle era. And we had Boyd Easley and I think Evan Rapps, maybe Tanner was there too, Tanner Hall. We got Beaver Creek, which really isn't known for building jumps, to build these jumps. And they towed him in with snowmobiles. And I remember standing there with Tomba, and he was like, that was the first time he saw those guys do any of that stuff. And he was like, holy cow, this is crazy. So that was kind of fun for sure.
Oh, that is so cool.
And I mean, when you think about it with athletes first, did you move in-house as a product manager, or were you a team manager, or how did you get in the door?
So I initially was boot product manager, but I was kind of hired as a young guy who could help out the senior management there. And I was given, the gentleman I worked for who was president at the time, which really was a good fit for me, wasn't really focused on titles or job descriptions or anything like that. Although I was boot product manager and that was my primary focus, the door was wide open. So back then, different things would happen. Like I started Rossignol.com with a small group of developers in Burlington, Vermont, with about a $3,000 budget. And, there weren't a lot of people that believed in the internet back then, and it really was more of a brochure than anything. But he's like, George, go do it. I'll give you $3,000. Let's go do it. So it started with stuff like that. And then, the back and forth was France all the time with the parent company was challenging. I mean, back then, to be honest with you, we communicated by fax. Or in the beginning, there weren't really emails. So I was sending faxes every night and every morning and receiving them and responding and, printing out pieces of paper and going to the fax machine and sending stuff. But that's where I got my first cut, like with developing skis. And I think the first ski that we designed a graphic for here in the US was the Viper skis. It was right at the same time that K2 came out with the K2 Extreme. And it was a really, really successful ski. And they had Scott Schmidt, Glenn Blake, and Mike Hattrup promoting that. And that was kind of the first thing, was to create this Viper X, and where we used basically a consumer GS racing ski. And I created a graphic for that locally here in Burlington that was called the Viper X. And that was a really big success for us.
Part of your whole career was kind of forcing the French to do things that they were uncomfortable with doing in just terms of product. And a lot of it, I would say that you probably had a vision 2 years earlier, and then you would have to sell them on something. And Rossi would come to the table a couple of years late with great product, but it was because they wouldn't listen to a lot of the things that you said. And did that start with the Viper, or does that start after with like the Bandit Triple X? I mean, did you see the extreme shit happening? Do you see K2 doing that stuff and say, hey, we have to do this, and then eventually you get the Viper that you want? Or does that happen later?
So I would use the word convince. I had to convince them of this stuff. I didn't have the capabilities of forcing anybody to do anything. But like I said, the president of the company at that time had a strong relationship with the owner of the company and a strong relationship with the management. And so I would get sent over there to do stuff. And once it started, then we got momentum. And at some point, we developed our complete own U.S. collection, or our complete own collection at one point for North America, based on, some of it was ski product specific, but others of it was more graphic oriented for sure.
I mean, I think the first really home run of your career, when fat skis were 80 millimeters underfoot or something like that, you see things are changing a bit. And then you come to the table with the whole Bandit X, Double X, and Triple X series, and you probably have to sell that in for a couple of years. But when that ski came out, I mean, did that validate everything that you were selling into the French of like, holy shit, at this point now we have a hot model of ski on the wall? Because at that point when those skis came out, it was the X Scream and the Double and Triple X that were all that mattered. I'm sure you had a bunch of single X's left over.
No, actually, the single X was the biggest seller because everybody could use that. But there's two really big things that don't get talked a lot about in the development of those skis. The first part was what we called back then super side cuts came out, and Elan was the innovator there. And they had developed a ski that everybody in the East Coast, for the most part, was using as a teaching tool. And it was really, really successful. And everybody was raving about the ability to take a beginner level skier and teach them more rapidly and get them more comfortable with the sport, because the side cut would allow you just to put the ski on edge and you'd feel the grip all the way through from tip to tail. That was a big, big deal for the industry back then, because in 1 year's time, we went from this collection of having at Rossignol probably 10 models to selling the next year 5 models. And we had to develop those skis really quickly because the retailers were ready to move 100% in this direction. So the first real skis that we developed were, so we had the Viper skis, which were, I think, 93 in the tip and maybe 60 in the waist. Well, actually, to go back a little bit, what happened was I remember sitting in the back room in the conference room in Williston at Rossignol, and Mr. Boisvive came over, and he was the owner of the company. And Hugh Harley, who was our sales manager for the East and a vice president, had really been trying to convince the parent company that we really needed these skis. And Mr. Boisvive sat there with us, listened to our story, and said, okay, George, tomorrow you fly to France, and I'm going to make you 2 new molds, and you're going to make those skis, and you're going to work with the head of R&D over there to make those skis. So the next day I got on a plane, and out of that came the original Cut 10.4, a Cut 9.9, and we had a powder ski that we were working on at that time, which was called a Cut 11.5, which was 85 underfoot, which was intentioned to be a powder ski, which was considered really wide and really funny looking back then. But what we learned out of that whole process was that with the addition of side cuts, you could make skis wider and still get the edge grip of a much narrower ski. So that's where the original Bandits came out. I think the Bandit X was 68. I mean, that was considered in that day about 10 millimeters wider than most skis anybody was skiing on at that point, and was a really good all-mountain ski. Volkel had a ski that I think was like 74, 75 underfoot, which we called a mid-fat, which they were having great success with. And then the 11.5 was originally 85 underfoot, and that was supposed to be our new, with a little bit more side cut powder ski for the future. So that's the first part of the transition. The second part that really is a story that a lot of people haven't told was what was going on with snowboarding and how it was affecting the ski business. Burton was a rocket ship at that point, and they were the dominant snow sports brand for kids. And they were really taking market share from the ski business. And they were doing it by being cool, and they made the sport cool. And they made boots that were really comfortable and easy to put on. They had different style clothes, and they were taking the youth market away from the ski business for sure. And there's rumors, and I've never heard this from Burton, but their mission was to wipe out the ski business as we knew it, and they were having success at doing it. And that's where I think a small group of people, myself, there was Jeff Matura at K2, there was Pat McIlvaine at Oakley, Greg Strokes a little bit, Tag Kleiner. The Solomon guys in France were really, they were a strong marketing machine, and they were kind of doing the same thing, where we really had to fight against an industry that was old and getting older. I remember going to listen to outside speakers saying, yeah, we don't need ads of guys jumping off cliffs. We need pictures of families in minivan driving up to the mountain and their family going skiing. And I was like, you know what? Skiing for me was always an escape. And even if you drove a minivan, you got to leave the minivan in the parking lot and you got to go be cool for a couple of hours. And I think that's the core of the sport. And so that core group of guys in the industry, we really started something from a very, very grassroots level, which was the original, Freeride concept and athletes and working with TGR and Matchstick and Giant de Cesare and working with Powder Magazine and eventually Freeze. There was a lot of people in the industry that didn't believe in the whole Freeride concept. And that's where it really started to change the business for sure. And we started to slow the Burton momentum down. And I know that happened because they didn't like what we were doing and we were doing. And skiers could do stuff as cool, if not cooler, than snowboarders. So it was a unique time. And it wasn't competitive between the brands and the people that were involved in it. We all worked together. There were athletes. I would go to Vail and rent a house for an event, and there were athletes from other brands that would stay with us. And, we'd put them up and we'd all travel together and work on the same thing to try and change the sport.
And that whole twin tip revolution, the new school of the sport that you're a part of on the ground floor, I think the POW Air, was that your first offering into that market?
No, actually it wasn't. There was actually a ski called the Rossignol. I always talk with Jason Leventhal about this, which came out about the same time that, you could see these terrain parks being developed and you would be like, okay, skiers are going to want to go in these, it's like at a mountain. It's not just for snowboarders. And so Bob, who was the master creator of snowboard stuff, developed these twin tip skis. They weren't really durable. They were kind of the wrong size. I think we had like a 153. So we were kind of sized in between what eventually became twin tips and snow blades. We were a little too short to be a real twin tip, and we weren't quite short enough to be a snow blade. But I developed a graphic. We had a little cartoon character called Rossignol, and he was on the original twin tips that came out of France.
When you look at the timeline of everything, is that coming out when Jay Leb is putting out his first line ski?
Yeah.
So that would predate the K2 Poacher and predate the 1080, but just be the wrong product for the market?
It was probably maybe a year before or right at the same time as the 1080. I mean, to be honest with you, I look back on it, we didn't have like I said, Rossignol was a really strong, established brand, and we were conservative for sure. And to try and launch that, the mix between being a conservative company and a not really very youthful company, we didn't sell a lot of those skis at all, but we had one.
Okay. So yeah, and it sounds like you were there early on. And I guess a big part of your career too, especially from early on, is working with the athletes. We talked about you doing some stuff with Tomba, but I mean, in terms of the athletes that you became friends with and you were able to work with and develop product with and do the cool shit that you like doing, between Eric Pehota and Trevor Petersen, they were like your original guys that were part of the team that you wanted to be like, right?
That's where it all started, with those two guys. Like, I can tell you, those guys were two of the nicest guys. They didn't get paid much. So those guys were at the same time of Play, Kattrup, and Schmidt. And they were totally different. The success of the stunt movies and stuff was cool, and the way they were filming it and the music was super cool. But these two guys were all about going into the backcountry, doing first descents. And the problem with them, to be honest with you, was nobody would go and film them because the stuff they were doing was so gnarly that it was like, well, nobody's done that before. I'm not going to walk up there with a camera, But we used to bring those guys around and do promotions, and they were two of the best purest skiers I've ever skied. And I remember we started them on a ski called the 4SB, which was an intermediate ski, which was an injected ski. It didn't have a lot of performance. I remember following those guys at Copper, the ski, and I was like, holy cow, these guys, it doesn't matter what you give them, they're going to ski good. And that ski probably was like 58, 59, maybe 60 underfoot.
Yeah.
It wasn't a wide ski at all, and it was injected, which is, the only injected skis around today are like the junior skis that are like 70 to 90 centimeters long. So it wasn't a great ski, but those guys were unbelievable and good sports and really, really good guys. They developed really, really strong relationship. I keep in touch with Eric a little bit, about once every year. if I make it up to Whistler, we get together with him and his wife and we have a beer. And so obviously the Trevor thing was a huge loss for me personally when he passed away. And just, he was such a sweet guy and such a good human. It was fun to work with him.
I mean, was he the first guy that you lost in the mountains like that, where it's a guy that's not just a friend, but you're also paying him to take those risks?
Yeah.
And is it heavy on your shoulders, like knowing that you play a role in him being there, even though he'd be there regardless?
So the way he got killed was he went back up to take a last run by himself in Chamonix and set off an avalanche, which was really pretty unbelievable because those guys knew the mountains and they knew the backcountry and they knew the snow better than anybody. But I remember being in the office and Jean-Marie Gond, who was our vice president of communications, got the call that he had passed away. And we worked with the family to bring him home. And it was terrible. And we did some fundraisers to help his family out some. That was back when we were at Las Vegas. And yeah, I still miss that guy. It was tough.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and I'm going to start out with Elan Skis. While some of us wish every day was a powder day, that's not reality. And that's where the Wingman and the Wildcat come into play for men and women. Think hard-charging front-side skis that are designed to make you remember how fun carving is. And they're still versatile enough where you won't want to go switch skis if it snows or it gets choppy out there. Like almost every Elan, these are both award-winning skis from reputable sources like Ski Magazine and others. And Wingman and Wildcat aren't only super fun to ski, but they're going to make you a better skier. And while you can find out about Wingman and Wildcat and the Playmaker series and Ripstick over at elanskis.com, the place where the knowledge about Elan skis and really everything in the industry is in your local ski shop. So go to one this fall, smell the wax and the P-Tex, flex the skis, and most importantly, talk to your local shop guy. The guy who's a real skier in there, and he can help you pick out what's best for you. So Elan wants you to support your local ski shop, and you can ask them what the right pair of Elans are for you. Next up, it's thermic heated socks. And when temperatures get nuclear cold, I don't hit the mountain without my thermic heated socks. They are the original heated sock, and still the industry leader after 20 years. It's a total game changer. We all know that if your feet are frozen, you're not skiing or snowboarding at your best. And if you are, you're suffering through it. I make sure that never happens by always wearing my thermic socks. Thermic's game-changing smart elastic technology heated socks are our world's first. These SET socks are a high-performance fitting, thin ski sock, where the patented heating components have stretch instead of a bulky band and element. So you literally feel like you're wearing your normal favorite pair of performance ski socks. But if heat isn't for you, don't worry. Thermic has you covered with socks for winter with their athlete-tested and proven Descent line of socks. This is the #1 recommended sock by boot fitters in North America because for over a decade, Descent has engineered performance socks to eliminate things like chafing or heel blisters in your boots when you're touring or splitboarding. Descent socks have a distinct locked-on fit that never seems to change, no matter what you get up to. At the end of the day, Thermic and Descent socks are the go-to socks for the people that know. Drop into your local boot fitter and retailer and you'll see what I mean. My final sponsor this round is Stanley. And sure, you used to know Stanley for keeping your grandpa's coffee hot in that signature green water bottle. Well, they still make that iconic bottle, but Stanley is the talk of the world these days. And while they may have started with the Powell movement, oh how they have grown. Nowadays, icons like Messi and Caitlin Clark and Post Malone and Olivia Rodrigo are all swearing by their Stanleys. And I've been telling you about how incredible their products are at keeping your drinks hotter and colder than anyone else for over 8 years now. I mean, Stanley invented the category in 1913, and they're constantly innovating to make sure that you have the best. And I know I love having the best. Lately, I've personally been drinking more water than ever thanks to my Stanley Quencher. And when I go to the mountain, I've integrated Stanley food storage devices into my ski routine instead of buying that $20 burger. But I have to say, my all-time favorite Stanley products are their pint glasses, which I've used every day for 8.5 years or so. Like millions of people out there, I love all my Stanley stuff, and I want you to get on the Stanley program too. They give me their best discount code available, so you get 30% off of all your products, and to do that, you head on over to stanley1913.com and you go shopping, buy a ton of stuff because you're going to get 30% off of it when you check out and use the code Powell 2025. So that's all capitals, Powell, no spaces, and then the numbers 2025 2025. That's going to get you 30% off your Stanley products. Those are my sponsors. Now it's time to jump back into the podcast.
Other athletes that we have to talk about. When do you meet Tanner Hall? Is he 15 years old when you meet him?
Yeah. So Tanner's the son I never asked for. I don't remember there being a lot of courtship. I think he was maybe getting a pair of 1080s. And I think he became really close with Evan, actually. Evan Raps, who was kind of our lead twin tip skier back then. Those guys became close, and I think Evan might have introduced me to him. And we hooked up and we said, yeah, we'll put together a deal for you. And I remember, I was thinking about this the other day, the first gravity games were at Mammoth. So there wasn't a lot of twin tip skiers then. So people like Kreitler and Brad Holmes, those guys were doing big air contests then. And we got up there and the gravity games were at night and the wind was blowing, it was snowing. And I think Holmes went off first and got hit by a gust of wind and got knocked sideways. And so I was up at the start with Tanner, and I would guess he might have weighed 110, 115 pounds then. And I literally had to push him out of the start so that he could make it to the landing and not case the jump. And that was the beginning, for sure.
And is it odd, like when you're traveling with a kid like Tanner and you're almost his guardian on the road, or at least, you're the adult in that situation, but you're like 40 years old, he's 15, 16, the son you never asked for, but he's also the pothead son who blazes everywhere that he possibly goes because that's what he does at that point in his life. And maybe now, who knows? But how hard is that for you as a coworker in that situation where you're also an adult? Is that a weird dynamic?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have my own kids yet, so that kind of was my schooling on how to help out. But, like I said, it was such a small group back then. We had 3 guys that could do it. Solomon had maybe 2 or 3 guys that could do it. K2 had 2 or 3 guys that could do it. And we asked so much of those athletes. And the athletes it wasn't hyper competitive. They knew they were changing the sport. That was really their focus. And they took care of each other too. For sure, with all these guys, there was lessons to be learned and how to be a professional athlete and how to be composed in front of people and things like that. But they were focused just on doing stuff. And the amount of work we asked those guys to do for how much they were getting paid was really, really pretty incredible. In Freeride, for example, with Brandt and Gordy and Kreitler and Micah, all right, I want you guys to have 2 movie segments in 2 different movies. I mean, that's not done anymore.
Yeah.
Those guys would have a $15,000 budget and I'd be like, okay, you're going up there this week to Alaska and you're filming with TGR. And then 2 weeks later, you're going back up and you're filming with Matchstick and you'd have to wait for the weather to be perfect so they could fly, all that stuff. And it was a different world. And sometimes even with those guys, we would get them in Warren Miller too. They'd end up with 3 segments in a year and nobody does that anymore. They got beat up. It was hard on their bodies. We asked a lot of them. We didn't pay them a lot of money, but that's again where the passion of the sport took over, and those people really, really wanted to be a part of it and part of change. And I give them full credit, and I'll give the other guys from K2, for example, Seth Morrison. I know Seth, or I've known Seth really well for a long time. I knew Kreitler, I knew Holmes. I knew all those guys. And we stuck together and we hung out together. And, I'd be the first guy to buy those guys a beer at a bar or do the things to help support those guys too. So it was really, really important that we change the sport and bring back coolness and vibe and youthness to the sport. And at that time too, racing was challenged. We didn't have social media. Everything was about a film segment or a magazine. So you had to get pictures in the magazines. You had to nail your film segments for the year and you had to get it done. And there was no social media. And so that's where racing kind of fell off a little bit because all the races were happening in Europe. There were superstars for sure, but there was no social media. There was no TV coverage, and it became a distant part of marketing for U.S. success.
When you think about these athletes and what you're or were or any brand is asking them to do, it's the only kind of place where you're like, hey, you're one of the best in the sport. I'm going to give you 60 grand. That's a lot of money in this business. I want you to risk your life and you could die 200 times this year. And they're like, fuck yeah, man. 60 grand to do that? Yeah, dude, I would do it for free.
It was less than that. I would say it was more like, the total package in the beginning was like 30, 35. So yeah, what we were asking them to do, but they were driven by passion, and they knew that, the first time that Brant and Shane and those guys went up to Alaska and skied on these wider skis, they were like, holy cow. They would call and they would be so enthusiastic. And back then, to be honest with you, in the beginning, I don't even think we had cell phones, because they were calling from payphones and stuff to tell me what was going on. They were doing something that nobody had ever done before, and they were as excited as the industry was to see it happen. So,
and then you could see both sides of everything, because you're going to Europe 12 times a year. I'm sure, are you going to the Hahnenkamm and seeing all the different races and seeing what a big deal ski racing is in Europe compared to the U.S.?
No, and to be honest with you, I've never been to the Hahnenkamm, and that's one of the things I've got to do for two reasons. Obviously, we have a guy, Marco Odermatt at Stockli, who I have a little bit of a relationship with, and I'd love to go see him race in the Hahnenkamm. But I'm also involved with the best little ski area in the world with Cochrane's Mountain. So I'm also good friends with Brian Cochran-Siegel. And so I'd love to be able to go watch him race too. But I was so product focused back then. I think I went to, like when I first started in 92, we brought all the press over to Teen, and I saw a World Cup slalom in Teen, and we were escorting about 15 or 20 members of the press back then around to all the factories, and we took them skiing and introduced them to some new race skis, which was cool. But that was about as much as I got to go be a part of racing back then, unless there were races in the U.S.
You were traveling a shit ton, I would think, that whole time, right? Like your real years, are you on the road to the point where it's almost like you're missing part of your family's lives just because work is so important?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get married till I was 40. And luckily I met my wife, who is still my wife and still loves me. And she was totally open to me traveling, and when it finally came to an end at Rossignol, I thought she would be happy to have me home more, but she was like, don't you have to go somewhere? Don't you have to be somewhere and do something? But so I didn't get married till late, and probably part of it was that lifestyle for sure. And there was a thing going on back then that was, if you were doing this and you were traveling all these athletes and you were trying to make it work, there was a rock star element to that lifestyle. It was late nights, early mornings, trying to get out, have fun, and support these guys and be this youthful part of the sport. So,
and you're skiing everywhere you could possibly ever want in the world to benefit the sport and develop products, right?
Yeah, and obviously that was a big part of being single back then. Is I'd go to Vail. I didn't have to come home to I didn't have anything to come home to back then. So I was really comfortable being on the road, and I even got really comfortable, in France. There was a hotel we stayed at right near the factory that had, 20 rooms on it, but it had an 18-hole golf course and a swimming pool. And, we'd get there and get rid of the jet lag. We'd go out and play golf and go for a swim. And I was as comfortable walking around in Grenoble as I was walking around in Vail by the time I'd been there that long and traveled there that much.
And while a lot of us had posters of the Lang girls on our walls, did you know the Lang girls?
No, and Lang and Rossignol were set up as competitive brands. We didn't share a lot of product models, things like that. I think the first product we shared was the mid boot, which opened up so you could walk in it. But otherwise, the way the owner wanted it to be was we were set up as competitive brands, and you guys go after each other. And in Vermont, they had a separate building originally, and they had their own warehouse. And eventually, close to the end of my tenure at Rossignol, they moved into our building in a different wing. It was kind of like you had to walk through 2 or 3 sets of doors. It was kind of like going through customs to another country, but I'd walk out there and see those guys once in a while and see what they were doing. But we were two totally different competitive brands at that point.
So you're like the lifeblood of Rossi in the United States. It sounds like when there are ideas that need to be pitched to the French, you're the guy that's going to be the face of the pitch, and you're going to be the passion behind why we have to do this. Then at the dealer level, you're the guy that loves the dealers, understands the small shops, and wants to support them as much as possible. And everybody in the industry loves you for that. But then at the same point, in-house at Rossi, it sounds like the president or the VP or whoever was in charge, it's like you can't get away from the French. You got like a French-Canadian guy who's in charge. We'll call him Francois. Did you two butt heads? Or what happened with your departure? Because it seemed like you're this dude that's running North America, even though you've got another guy ahead of you who's running it from Canada. The president's in Canada running it from there or something like that. And then all of a sudden you're ousted. How does that happen?
It was challenging. So it always was, the product development for the U.S. was always, and the needs of the U.S. market was always somewhat of a strained part of the relationship, right? Because there were people over there that were in charge of developing new product, developing new ideas and new graphics. And if you're a guy in the U.S. who's realistically coming with these ideas which were important for his market, they weren't always important or they weren't viable in other markets yet. So that you had to be very nuanced in the way you approach these things and the way you talk to people over there. And there's no better way to say it, but you had to be careful not to hurt other people's feelings, because they would say, oh, this is my job. Why are you doing it? Why are you doing these graphics? And so that was always a challenge. And I think that was the hard part. I think I only worked, when Francois became president, I only worked there for a year. And I think Francois had different ideas of being more accepting of a global product line than what I was used to. And it happened really quick for me. And it was disappointing for sure, because I spent a long time. And I'll tell you, to this day, the team and the people that I worked with at Rossignol in the U.S. in Williston, Vermont, we were a family, and it was a really, really special place. So much so that to this day, the lady who ran the front desk, Patty, the people who worked in the warehouse, the people who did warranty, we all keep in touch, and we all get together once or twice a year and have a dinner and have drinks. And I tell people that, that time that I worked there probably was the best job I ever had. And it never really felt like work, because there was a whole bunch of people there who were close, who had each other's backs. I know Patty, who ran the front desk, she and my mom developed a relationship because I was traveling so much. Patty would have to arrange for me to have birthday cakes delivered to the office that I could share with everybody with my mom. So that was a unique time, and probably like I said, probably the best job I ever had, because I never really looked at it like work. I never asked, under the management that I worked for under the longest amount of time, I never asked for a pay raise. I got bonuses, I got raises. I would get pulled aside and be like, George, that presentation you made, the buying group hard goods committee was awesome. I'm giving you a bonus. That was the kind of thing and the kind of way it worked. And I've really, with this job now at Stockli, I've really tried to build a family culture and do the same thing, because it's a small business. And, 1 year in the ski business is really only about a third of a year in a normal business. And so when push comes to shove, a lot of times you don't get to work within a job description. You have to do things that aren't in your job description. And, starting this business here, I had to go do magazine tests and do things like that by myself, because I was the only guy doing it. So it's important that we build a culture that's a family-oriented culture, and that we have each other's back, whether it be about work and the things that we need to do and the things that we need to get done and helping each other out, or outside of work, if somebody's sick or gets hurt or whatever, that we take care of each other and keep in touch with each other.
Awesome. Well, where am I going to go with this? So for time, I'm going to say that you leave Rossignol, you're bummed, you get out of the ski industry, you go to Atlanta for a few years, you come back up, you start consulting. We talked about that. There was a bunch of different brands that you worked with, and one of those brands is Stockli, and I think you start working with them in 2009.
Were you involved in the first Scott Schmidt ski that came out that year?
No, that was before my time. What they were doing with Freeride and the wide skis were a little bit before my time. They were wide, they were really long, and they were really stiff.
Yeah.
I think, part of jobs and what happens is a little bit of timing and a little bit of luck. So I had, all that time at Rossignol and all the testing and development we did, I developed a feel for what a good ski was and how you developed a ski and how you tested it. And how you worked on it. And I remember I spent about 3 months with a guy named Walter Rooser, who was the CEO of Stockli at the time, building spreadsheets, business plans. He's like, all right, we need to get a footprint in the US and we need to own the business. He asked me to develop a plan. And the plan was to develop a wholly owned subsidiary, which is what we are now, that would be owned by the parent company, that would live on long after I was gone and be a successful business for this European Swiss brand. And we spent about 3 months developing spreadsheets, working on concepts, territories. He came back to me, oh yeah, you're going to have to do Canada too, all these things. I was like, okay. And we finally got to the point where he's like, okay, we're going to do it. I was like, okay, that's good. But there's one small problem. He's like, what? I haven't skied on the skis yet. And so he's like, okay, I'll send you a pair. And he sent me a pair of, at that time, the Storm Rider 95s. And I took them out here to Stowe with my 2 young daughters. And we were on a beginner intermediate trail. And I remember I had my phone with me. And I made 3 turns. And I called him and I said, done deal. This is done. I had never really skied on anything. It probably is the feeling of a Stockli probably goes back to that feeling you got from a 4SK, how balanced it was, how comfortable it was, how easy it was to ski on. And at the same time, Walter had brought in a new head of R&D, and they were making really, really good changes. And that's part of the luck of this job, was they were making really good changes in developing skis and opening the envelope. But the skis there take about 20 days to make a pair compared to a couple hours at most factories. So that's part of the Swiss culture, and they're really unique, and they live up to the hype.
Nice. Well, I've only heard great things about the product. And also I hear that since you've been at Stockli, I mean, like your whole time there, you've been one of the most profitable ski brands in the business as well. So you're doing it, you're able to retain margin for your dealers and everybody else, and everybody's happy because it's a great product. So I think that's a tribute to whoever's at the top, and that's you in this country. So that's pretty cool. But that's not how I'm going to end the podcast. I end the podcast with something that I call Inappropriate Questions. And that's where I get someone that you know to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. Usually these people go on record and they want me to record them and I play them to you. No one wanted to go on record with you. And really, to tell you the truth, getting information about you is hard because there's no information on the internet. And I have to go to your high school friends and people like that to find some stuff. And I was able to do that. But with Inappropriate Questions, I actually got 2 people to come up with sets of inappropriate questions. So you get a little double dose, but we'll see how long we're going to go here. Here is your first inappropriate question from an anonymous source. Have you ever had to go to a sales meeting smelling like a dirty diaper?
No. Well, actually, yeah, we did smell like a dirty diaper. Well, I had, who's still one of my close friends. We were roommates the whole time we were at Rossignol, and we were staying at a hotel in Park City. And about 3 rooms down from where we were staying was a family, and every day they would put their babies' dirty diapers out in the hallway. And unbeknownst to myself and my then roommate, we didn't realize that a couple of the senior sales reps in the company were taking these diapers every day and putting them under our bed. And I would look over at Scott Dawson, my friend, and I'd be like, Scott, do you stink? He's like, no, I swear I don't stink. I'm like, something smells bad. And it got to the point where one day we were riding up the chairlift and we were like, our clothes smell bad now. We got to fix. And we went back and we scoured the room and we found there was probably 30 dirty diapers under our bed, wide open. And that was a good trick. I give him credit.
All right. How many times have you been confused in public for Steve Bannon?
That's only recently, but I've lost some weight in the past. So I used to get Russell Crowe, and I think probably more in liberal Vermont, people don't like Steve Bannon, so they accuse me of being him anyways, just so they have somebody to beat up, but not a lot.
But it's happened for sure, right?
Yeah, once or twice.
Okay. And so this is going to be your last one, but there's going to be multiple parts to it. So you love a great steak dinner and a good cabaret or a good Cabernet. And in Denver at SIA, you would go to the same steakhouse every single night of the show, every year, every night. What was so good about that place?
You might need to fill in some more on that question.
the steakhouse, I tried to kind of say it with the cabaret or cabaret. What was the steakhouse that you would go to at Denver?
I thought you were talking about Cabernet wine.
Well, I was just trying to give you a hint.
Now, the story about that, which is kind of funny, is I don't know that I would go there every night. Actually, so it originally started in Vegas when I had marching orders from my boss that I had to win over the guys from Freeze magazine. So the Freeze magazine guys were very into burlesque back then, and we would go and I would buy them dinner at a couple really nice places in Las Vegas, and that's where it started. And then after that, actually in Denver, I was called by a buyer who was a buyer for, I won't name the store or the person, who was one of the biggest retailers, multiple stores in the country. He said,
Franklin Park?
No, actually it didn't. Okay. But he was like, George, what are you doing for dinner? It was really weird that he even called me, but he was like, what are you doing for dinner this night? And so I was like, yeah, I'll meet you guys there and we'll go do it. And it was his big night out, and he came with a fistful of $1 bills. And it wasn't just me. It was like presidents and vice presidents of 3 or 4 major companies and me. And I think he probably guessed that I would be the guy who might take a leadership role in negotiating. So I don't know, but it was a fun night. We had shrimp cocktails and steaks and some wine, and left with smiles on our faces for sure.
All right. And let's think about your biggest tab ever when you're on somebody else's credit card, which would be the companies that you work for. What's the biggest dinner that you've ever had to pay for?
That's a good question because it's expensive now. And so we have sales meetings up here at Stowe, and I buy 15, 20 people dinner. But, there was a whole bunch of them. Actually, a good story about Rossignol was, I was on the road so much. I had a really, really big expense account. And at one point, they decided to audit my expenses for a year. And I went up to the CFO and the comptroller. I'm like, well, what did they find out about the audit? They're like, well, number one, George flies coach everywhere he goes. Okay, good. Number two, he does take people out to dinner, but it's real business people, and he doesn't do it a lot. And the third part is he eats at McDonald's a lot too. So that's the big dinners. So anyway, there's 4-figure ones in there for sure that were big, but that's the right thing to do. Actually, the biggest one might have been like 2 years ago in Chicago. I was doing the buying group show, and it was when the 2 buying groups merged to become one, and we had the hard goods committee, and we probably had about 15 guys in Chicago at a airport hotel, and we took them across the street to this Italian restaurant. I paid for dinner for all of them. So that was a big one for sure. And it works, That's part of the relationship, part of the business for sure.
For sure. And then when it's not on someone else's card, have you lost a big credit card roulette one ever before and you've had to pay a big tab out of that?
I think so. Back in the Freeze magazine days, there might have been some credit card roulette going on, and I might have lost one or two, but I don't think I ever won one, that's for sure. So I bailed after. I learned my lesson pretty quick on those.
All right. Well, that is Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And I was thinking that this was going to be a hard one because I couldn't get that much information, but really, you're such a legend in this business and have worked with so many different people over the years that I have to say like 2 or 3 things, and you can kind of transition that into a story, which was nice. And when I was talking to people, no one would give any dirt or anything like that. Everybody just wanted to kiss your ass and say how great you are, which is behind your back, which is so boring, but it's a tribute to your passion, your work ethic, your brains, and how you treat people. And you're a legend in the industry. I thank you for sharing your story, and I thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. That's very, very nice and very kind of you. But I would say the good part of this business, and the last thing I'll leave you with, is it's full of good people. And it's really nice. You can be competitive with your competitors, but on my cell phone, I have most of all of our competitors' names and numbers, and I can call them and we talk and say hi. And Mike, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
So that was time with George Couperthwait, and what a ski career. I mean, yeah, there was that period when he was let go by Rossi, and that was a bummer, and he moved to Atlanta, and his whole life changed. But that was really just a blip in the radar of an incredible ski career that's been focused on product, relationships, and passion. George is the man and an important part of this ski industry, especially over the past 30 years. So it was great to get him on this podcast and hear his story. Thank you for that, George. That's the podcast. At this point, I want to thank you for listening. I want to ask you to review me wherever you listen. And finally, I need to thank the brands that make this podcast happen. Without them, I would not have a show each week. I'm talking about Elan Skis, Stanley, Outdoor Research, Best Day Brewing, Thermic Heated Socks, and Ski Idaho. Have a great week, everyone.